Today it's time to talk again about Data Studio, and we're focusing on permissions, all the different types of permissions that are possible to give, how to manage them, and what makes each one better in some situations than other. We're back in Data Studio sessions, and let's go. Hi everybody, we're back to the datadice videos with Alex, Thomas, and Ricardo. And today we're talking again about Data Studio, focusing on one specific part of it, maybe a surprise second one, but permissions. When people ask you about Data Studio permissions, what do you tell them? Yes, finally I can talk about it.
So you have to keep a lot of stuff in terms of permissions in your head and how it works, basically. So maybe at first to say there are three kinds of permissions. You have a data studio, or three votes, and two separate things where you can give permissions to it, right? So maybe let's start with the votes, because I think that it's also more easy. So you have the owner, you have the editor, and you have the viewer of a dashboard.
Of the dashboard itself.
Of the dashboard, yes. Yeah. So let's start with the dashboard, yes. So a viewer is quite easy, I would say. He or she can a person who got the role viewer, just can view the dashboard, cannot edit it, cannot change it, whatever. Can for sure interact with filters and so on, right? Cost filtering and also usual filters. Can also change the navigation, so in terms of changing to another page and so on. So that's everything possible. But so exactly. For most of the customers, we usually then, so for sure we have edit rights, which are coming later too. Then we have most of the time, I would say, also some parts from the customer who have, or some people who have edit access to it. Most of the time the tech guys or analytics person. And then for sure a lot of persons also just have view rights, that not every person can change reports and something, right? Yeah, exactly. So and then you have the edit rights, as I said. So there you can then also click on edit mode, and then you can also change the whole report, changing dimensions, metrics, and so on. Yeah, exactly.
So it's both rearranging elements, but also adjusting which, I don't know if there's a KPI scorecard there, like which value is being displayed there. So it's like already giving edit rights. You need to think exactly who you're going to give access to, because without that much knowledge, it's quite easy to jump into the edit mode and move some stuff around. Now, at least with the draft and published version, you have another layer there going, and there's version control. But in general, unless there's a good reason that someone is going to be updating and making adjustments, we keep it at view rights.
And especially this version history is also a good thing, right? Because we also always had the fear when we give too much people edit rights to a dashboard, then one person changed something and nobody knows, okay, who changed it and why the person changed it. But now in the version history, for example, there's also the name of the person, or the name of the person who changed it, and so on, which is way better. And you can also then check which changes were made. You can also go back to that version and so on, which is quite good and way better. Yes.
And the last one.
And the last one is the ownership. So one person or one account, let's say back to be 100% precise, one Google account has the ownership of the report. So that means when you are starting with a dashboard, so when you are creating a dashboard, the person who created it or the account by default is the ownership. I think we already mentioned it 200 times,
but it's important.
It's important.
I know it's so important. I already know what you're gonna say, but yes.
So you can change the ownership inside your own organization. So for example, we are at datadice.io. So I can change when I have a dashboard on my own and I have the ownership for it, I can change it to Ricardo, to Thomas, whoever who's in Datadice and have a Datadice.io account. But I cannot change it to a customer or to another domain. That we cannot do so Google is not allowed, or say it's not allowed to do it due to privacy, security reasons, I would say. Yes, so that is really important. So check with the customer you are speaking with, or even just in a bigger company, maybe you have also different domains inside and so on. So checking with which domain you are creating the dashboard or so exactly. Else, so if you say at a certain time, okay, we have to change it in a way, you have to copy your report with the other domain. Not big pain point, but for sure also then the links for the dashboard changes, right? And also be a little bit more careful with the data sources behind and so on. But better to always to define that one at the beginning. That would be also a good thing we should mention in the video before we did.
Yeah,
in terms of
defining ownership. That is true.
Defining ownership. So check out the other video
and think about. We say that.
And so we talked about what you have to keep in mind when we are starting a new dashboard project and so on. And I think this defining ownership thing is also a quick thing you can check, but it's important also in terms of then that you can use it for a long time.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's a small thing. It can be a hassle, but it makes a lot of sense. Like it makes a lot of sense why it's structured that way. And I think in many cases, if you're within an organization, you're not going to be shifting around points. But like you said, if you're working with external partners, and or if your company has multiple different domain names, then it can get tricky. I think it's even like with just it needs to be exact. It cannot be like, I don't know, if we had datadice.de and datadice.it, I think it's also not.
But it's another domain.
So if you're in a large organization with multiple locations, and then some people have the ending for Germany, some people for UK, some people, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But this is just for the dashboard itself, no? And I think that's relatively easy to grasp. It makes sense. If you want to take it to the next level, actually, we can talk about. So there's through the Datastudio API, you can actually manage these permissions, and that is quite cool. Now, if you start growing and you have multiple dashboards, you can review who has permissions, which level, and if you talk to us, you can do it also through a dashboard. Manage make bulk changes of permissions. No, because it's in the Datastudio UI is quite straightforward, no? Like it's quite obvious where it is. You click, 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 but it's click, click, click.
Yeah.
And if you're going to update 15 permissions, it's already quite time consuming. And I think we've talked about it a couple of times during videos. We made this dashboard to manage the permissions of other dashboards. And then with that, all the dashboards that are connected to this one account that we use are displayed there. And all the roles and all the users with those roles are displayed there, and we can make bulk changes in that. I think it's super useful, and because I can do it in make these changes in bulk.
So from this API, right, you can get a list of users, and you can get a list of data sources, and then you know which user has which access to Datastudio.
Mm-hmm.
You get the lists, and you can also change it and modify it, as you said. Yes. And maybe, and in the UI, so as Ricardo said, so you can click on share, and then you can type in, so it needs, the user needs to have a Google account. That is maybe also important. Yeah. We also made a blog post how to create.
That is a super, I've been using, Sanyupta from our team wrote this blog post. That is important. No, Datastudio, very good tool, free, everything. You do need a Google account. No, so that's important. Not a Gmail address or something. You can connect it. The link to that is going to be here. So you can go through it. It takes, I think, 90 seconds or something to set it up. It's just so then the email address that you want now is allowed to use Google products. No, I quite often need to send this blog post to other people.
So also well performing as well.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, because it can be quite frustrating, especially like if you don't know about it, and also people in the organization don't know about it, because they can be like, hey, I have the same domain extension. Why this person can do it and I can't? I was like, yeah, well, you need to. He took the 90 seconds to do it, and you have not. So that is one. Yeah. But permissions.
Yes, permissions. So then, so as I said, so then we have covered the whole dashboard topic, but for sure Datastudio needs data. So we also have the data source part, and there we also have permissions. Same roles, so also viewer, editor, and an owner. Ownership, we also have the same struggles. So also you cannot change the ownership to another domain from a data source, also not possible. Yes. So when you don't have access to the data source, you can also still see the data in the dashboard. But for sure, if you want to change data, or if you want to just check which data is available on the data sources and so on, you need these kind of access to the data source. So with view rights, for example, on the data source, you also have to a little bit be careful here, because there are two types of data sources now: the embedded one and the reusable one. But let's try to go into detail later to this point. So at first we're just talking about data sources. So with data sources, and when you have view rights, you can, for example, go to the datastudio main page, then clicking on data sources, and then you can search for the data source, and then you see, for example, all the different data dimensions and metrics are behind. Maybe they also put a description behind every field that you can also check how is the calculation and so on, or maybe you have a separate documentation for that. Yes, so that you can do with view rights. And for sure, edit rights is then to also add, for example, calculated fields to the data source, or to change data types, or to change the default aggregation type, or changing already existing dimensions or aggregated dimensions. Yes, exactly. So that is quite important. And for sure, so when a person changed something in the calculated field, then all the other persons also see that change, and it's for every person the same. Yes, exactly. So that is quite important. Yeah.
So then, because so we went through the roles on the dashboard level, the roles on the data source level, and then there's this part that I think is where the confusion mostly happens. First confusion is that there's these two levels, and then the other confusion is a data source that is embedded and a data source that is reusable.
Mm-hmm.
You only see it when you go into manage data sources, and you see all the data sources, and there's this tag looking like element, and I think embedded one looks like a attachment clip, whatever. They have an icon.
So embedded is the blue, and and reusable is green, for example. Exactly. And for example,
which tells me nothing, the color, no, besides making them visual.
Exactly.
The color is
and also to differentiate, you also then see for reusable data sources, you always see that you can for
make
embedded
reusable.
Make reusable. Exactly.
But not always you can, no?
Yeah, it also depends on the permissions you have.
Exactly.
And and really important. So maybe at first to say what is reusable and what is embedded. So reusable data sources means that this data source is just available in this dashboard. So currently it's like when you are inside your dashboard and you are adding inside this dashboard a new data source, it's always embedded. When you are in your datastudio homepage, and there you're clicking on edit data source and so on, and then selecting connector and whatever table, then it's always a reusable data source already, which makes also total sense. Because so when you are selecting the dashboard, then for sure the data source is just available in this. The data source is just available in the dashboard. But as we already said, you can make every data studio embedded data source. You can also make reusable when you have the correct permissions for that. Yes, so that is quite important. And then, for example, comes some cases like, okay, there's an embedded, so one important thing, embedded data sources, you share, so when a person have view access on the data source, you have also view access on the data source, which is not so important, because when the data studio data source is, you have just view rights, but you also just have view access on the data on the dashboard, you have no opportunities to see the data source, because you cannot click on edit and then see the data sources. And in the main page, there is no data studio data source, because it's not listed, because it's just an embedded one. So, but just to be completely clear. So yeah, when you have an embedded data source, you cannot change the permissions on the data source. You can just change. You have to change the permissions on the dashboard generally overall.
But what are the use cases? No, it's like when someone would ask you, like, "Hey, okay, for which one should I use an embedded data source, and for which one should I go for a reusable?"
So yeah, so I would say in most of the cases, reusables is better, because then you also have this kind of, okay, we have this one single source of truth, you can say, right? And when you have the different order tables or whatever, and then you have different calculated fields inside and so on, I would always say, okay, this is our data source for orders, and please do not connect the additional one, even if it's the same BigQuery table, for example. So you go with 2 data sources on the same BigQuery table, which is for sure possible. But for example, as we said, you are losing calculated fields you added to the data source, or if you already select all the revenues and so on as currency, as one of the currencies, you also lose that, and so on and so on. So some configurations you already did, you are losing when you are adding a new one. So embedded, for example, is better just so it's easier and in terms of also faster, especially for these
exploratory
dashboards, because that is way quicker to do it. Yeah, exactly. So, but as I said, so I would say most of the time you should use reusable if you don't have any kind of other use case to use embedded.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong, but I think I always set it as make it reusable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
because
so that is just so as I said, so when you are adding or creating a data source inside Datastudio, then it's already a reusable. When you are doing it inside the dashboard, then it's an embedded one. And so most of the time, also the first time I click, because I usually always create it inside the dashboard, because then it came in your mind, okay, I have to add a new data source, and then it's embedded, and I quickly click on make reusable, then it's easy. And yes, and after you're clicking on make reusable, you can search it in the homepage of Datastudio, and you can also change the permissions for that data source directly. And is there a tick box for that? Could be. So when you're clicking on make reusable, I think they are asking you if you want to share the same permissions also to the reusable one. I think so.
Yeah.
So and then, so I don't know. So when Ricardo has added access to the dashboard, and this is also an embedded dashboard, embedded data source inside, and then I'm clicking on make reusable, then Ricardo has at first added access to the reusable data source. But for sure you can change it then later. Yes.
Wrapping up, dashboard, so report level permissions on that.
So be sure, be careful who should get access to edit access and so on. But so as we said, so the version controlling is quite important to see who made which changes, and this kind of switching from draft version to embedded version, public version. Yes, so that's quite important. So and the view person just can see the published version, right? They cannot see the draft version, which makes sense.
Yeah, and
then 2 different kinds of data sources, right? So embedded and reusable. So most of the time use reusable data sources to use it for different dashboards. Sometimes for a quick thing you can also use an embedded one.
Yeah, good. If someone wants to read that blog post on how to activate your account as a Google account, or one of our top, I think one is always a perennial favorite, a blog explaining a lot about the data source permissions, where should I go?
Yeah, so you can go to Medium. So we already made a big series of Datastudio blog posts, and one of our colleagues made make your email domain to a Google account blog post. You can also quickly check it out, and as Ricardo said, it's just some second thing. So then check out also our other Datastudio videos we already made, and subscribe to our channel. LinkedIn for other Datastudio updates or team funny things we are doing, and also the newsletter where you're getting, if you want to build dashboards, cool insights and cool ideas.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. Thomas
was today a little bit quiet, I would say.
Thanks you for watching, and we'll see you next week.
See you.